That kills all.
Good afternoon. It is Wednesday, February the 12th, and so I'd like to call the Higher Education Subcommittee to order. Let's start by calling the roll. Would the clerk call the roll or give us the opportunity to log in? I think it worked. Oh, wait. Okay, thank you. I think, Madam Clerk, call the roll, or take the roll.
Mr. Chairman, you have 5 members present. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. I think to get started, I'd like to make a few introductions. I'd like to introduce you to some of the people that will be helping on this committee. Desiree White is our clerk. Suzanne Walker is my assistant. Carly Easley is our research analyst. And Katie Robertson, to my left, is our attorney. And I would also like to recognize that today is MTSU Day on the Hill, and it is also UT Day on the Hill. So with those introductions in hand, I also want to take just a moment to go over a few rules since this is our first committee. These are really the same rules as are on all committees, but I'll go over a couple of brief ones just so that we're all on the same page. First, bill notices. Bills must be put on notice by 3:30 the Wednesday before the next scheduled meeting. So 3:30 the week before we have our committee meeting on Wednesday. 3:30 on Wednesday before our committee meeting the week before. Second thing I want to point out is committee amendments. For a committee that meets on Wednesday like this one, the committee amendment deadline is 10 a.m. the day before, so it'll be on 10 a.m. the Tuesday before. Verbal amendments and amendments filed after the deadline shall not be considered. And then the third thing I want to mention are witness cards. Requests to testify in committee must be submitted to the committee at least 24 hours prior to the scheduled meeting time. So with that information in mind, today we have two bills on the agenda and we have a presentation. We'll take the bills first. And the first bill on our agenda is by Leader Lamberth and Chairman Moon. Chairman Moon, you've got a motion and a second. You're recognized on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. First, I have a clarifying amendment, Mr. Chairman. It's barcode 3428.
Okay, motion on the amendment. Do we have a motion on the amendment? Motion and a second. Okay, you're recognized on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is, like I say, a clarifying amendment. It clarifies who pays whom and how much. The Department of Military shall pay 100% of the maximum resident in-state tuition. And it makes clear that this program pays last dollar, that it's net of all state and federal programs. So the intent is to stretch these dollars as far as we can for the National Guard members. Mr. Chairman, I respectfully ask the committee for a favorable vote on Amendment 3428.
Okay, members, you've heard the discussion, or you've heard the explanation. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Chairman Stevens.
Oh, I'm not a chairman, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I appreciate the upgrade for the day, though. I don't know if this amendment or the bill is the best place to ask this question, but it just came to my attention when I was reading through here. It says that the member is attending a public educational institution. And I just looked up the code, and it defines an educational institution as a public institution or private, TCATs, et cetera. And all throughout this amendment and the bill, both, it refers to educational institution numerous times, but in this one place, it says that they have to attend a public educational institution. So I just want to be sure we're not limiting these people to only public universities, because I think that's what the language is going to do here.
Chairman Moon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the member's question, this establishes what will be paid to that private institution or that TCAT, the maximum resident in-state tuition. So it's more clearly, we in previous years, it was the highest in-state tuition. And we added the word resident, and that would apply if the person went to Vanderbilt. They would only receive what the resident in-state tuition at MTSU or another LGI or the University of Tennessee. I hope that answers the question. We will get more in depth on the bill, and I can give you some information about that breakdown on the bill.
Any other questions on the amendment? If not, then we're voting to put the amendment on the bill. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Amendment goes on the bill. Chairman Moon, you're recognized on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. This bill does four things. The current program is sunsetted on 30 June 2025. The governor's budget is, in his proposed budget, is allocating $4,084,000 to continue the funding of the bill, of the STRONG Act. This bill increases the current allowable hours from 120 credit hours to 130, and that would help us mirror other state and federal reimbursement programs. It reduces the number of days allowed for a member to request tuition reimbursements from 90 to 45 days. That way, MTSU, Austin Peay, and others would get their funds more quickly. The fourth thing it does is clarify what is meant by mandatory fees, and it puts it in the definition. And those are lab fees, parking fees, technology fees, library fees, not limited to. So that's what the bill does. In the 110th General Assembly, the STRONG Act was passed. In the 112th General Assembly, And it was passed for one bachelor's degree. In the 112th, we added master's degrees and certificates for vocational and technical schools. In the past 6 years, it's been very, very positive impact on our Guard members. It was originally passed as a recruiting tool, and with addition of the master's program, it became a retention tool. We have a number of people, especially on the air side. We invest a lot of money in flight training, and a captain who's soon to make major and hopefully go to colonel needs a master's degree. Since that addition, the usage of this program has greatly increased. So, Mr. Chairman, that's what the bill does. It's a little bit of history about the act. We do have a breakdown of the institutions. There's been 24 TCATs and community colleges that have used this, 7 state universities, 22 private colleges and universities, 4 historical black college and universities participate. So I hope that gives some light to the member's question about public-private TCATs, community colleges. I believe the chairman's MTSU has had 195 students take place on the Army side and 75 on the air side. And I think we have a master sergeant here be interested in knowing that 88 students have been on the Army side and 33 on the air side. So it's being well utilized. You will notice there's no sunset provision in this bill, but it will still have to be funded. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be glad to answer any other questions.
And I'm going to ask a quick question. We discussed earlier the extent to which this bill would cover fees. Some academic programs have fees that are really high. Can you kind of give us your understanding of how this bill would help with fees?
Well, in the policy military, they will develop a policy on the fee structure, and they'll do that year to year. And that's what the bill speaks to. We did have, and I'm partly to blame for bringing the bill when we put the master's degree on, adding fees. In our system, we had a fee that was somewhere in the neighborhood of $27,000. And that would probably take out a couple of degrees for other people. So that's what's led to the redefinition and how that's going to be addressed in the future. I hope that answers the chairman's question.
Yes, thank you. Other questions? Okay, seeing none, are you all ready to vote? If so, then Madam Clerk, open the vote. And are we ready to take the vote?
Mr. Chairman, you have 6 ayes and 0 nays.
Okay, bill passes. Next bill on our agenda is House Bill 148 by Chairman White. You have a motion and a second. Chairman White, you're recognized for an explanation.
Yes, thank you, Chairman and Committee. House Bill 148 is a bill that what we're asking in this to make permanent a pilot program we started back in 2022. As you all know, we have the program called Tennessee Promise. And Tennessee Promise allows every high school student in our state to take the lottery funds and go on and have the free tuition basically for their either at a TCAT or a community college. And as we got into this program, we found that a lot of times our low-income students, they would start in the second year, they wouldn't be back because there's a lot of issues that they would face. So what we created the pilot program to create where each student will be assigned a mentor coach during their time, 4 years or 2 years in the program. And that this mentor coach, then we would have up to $1,000 that the student can draw from, which I call life gets in the way issues. They would not get the money directly, but they would contact their coach. And if they had issues that kept them from going to school, like you had a flat tire or you had your car break down or many things. And so we have found out that the graduation rates for our low income students in Tennessee Promise has increased 6 times. It was about 6% of those returning. Now it's up 6 times that. So it's been a very effective program. So now we want to make this program permanent. The fiscal note you probably have before you were getting that changed fiscal review misunderstood. The bill is asking and allocating $7 million from the general fund to complete this. So as we move forward, but it's a great program. And if you're going to spend a lot of money on Tennessee Promise, might as well make sure that they're completing. So this program we've already got in place is very effective, but we're asking in this bill that we make that permanent. With that, answer any questions.
Okay, members, you've heard the explanation. Any questions or discussion? Okay. Question's been called. Members, you're ready to vote. Madam Clerk, open the vote.
Mr. Chairman, you have 6 ayes and 0 nays.
Okay, bill passes and moves out to full education. Okay, next on our agenda is a presentation. The presentation is going to be by Lou Hanneman, and we need to go out of session for that presentation. And I'll let you get started with introductions. Let us know for the record who you are.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lou Hanneman with the Tennessee Student Assistance Corporation, as well as the Higher Education Commission, joined today by Peter Abernathy, who is our Chief Compliance Officer over all of the financial aid portfolio for the state. With just a brief outlook overview, projections for lottery funding in the current and the next fiscal year. Just a quick update on the scope of the lottery programs. Right now, we have 13 programs in the lottery funded, so that's revenues directly from the Tennessee Education Lottery or the Lottery Corporation. Those 13 programs include the base awards for Hope scholarships, as well as the Aspire and the General Assembly Merit Scholarship, dual enrollment, Tennessee Reconnect, Helping Heroes, and other programs like this all come in under that umbrella. We're talking about 84 post-secondary institutions receiving or able to draw down those funds for their students. About 160,000 students are receiving awards directly from the lottery-funded programs. A significant number of those are dual enrollment students, and that totals about $470 million annually. We also have state-funded programs outside of the lottery, primarily the Tennessee Student Assistance Award, coming in at about $113 million a year. Overall, those programs are serving about 64,000 students and about 100 different institutions participating, with new institutions applying for and gaining access to those if they meet the criteria each year. Financial aid funding revenues. I know this was a big topic of discussion during the special session, particularly for the lottery funded programs. And so just want to walk you through, what are the actual buckets? I know this gets pretty muddy when we talk about a program dealing with $600 million. It's a lot of moving parts. So just to break those out, Tennessee Promise is independent of the lottery funding as well as the state funding for scholarships. We created back in 2013-14 its own endowment. That endowment has grown to a little over $1 billion. It's conceivable that we could be at 1.2, 1.3 here by the end of this fiscal year. And off of that, the earnings produce the revenues necessary to fund the Tennessee Promise program. And so, again, this is the first program of its kind in the country. And, congratulations to this body, certainly for holding the line over the course of that decade. This program is now essentially funded in perpetuity in a stable, locked up way. The funding from this program can only be spent on Tennessee Promise, which is important because even this year alone, we had our highest application number for that program. So it continues to be a huge part of, the high school, talking points, particularly driven by our partner organizations, Tennessee Achieves and the Heirs Foundation. This is one of our real key anchor programs in the state. Another key anchor program, Tennessee Student Assistance Award. Again, this is about $113 million in the governor's proposed budget. There is an expansion of that by about $12 million. A couple of years ago, the federal government overhauled the federal financial aid process. They switched over from what was called the expected family contribution to a student aid index. I don't know all the moving and mechanical parts to that, but what happened was a little bit expanded access and eligibility to federal financial aid. To accommodate that, this program in Tennessee mirrors the federal financial aid program. It is a low-income based program, and so this $12 million is really a hope for first installment towards balancing out. At one point in time, this program was able to fund all eligible students. We've now been backing down from that. I don't know what the exact percentage is that we are funding, but we're hoping to, over time, get back to where all students eligible will receive this award. Finally, the Tennessee Education Lottery Scholarship. Just in terms of revenue projections, this year is an interesting year because we've had a significant decline over the course of the year in lottery funding as compared to the projected revenues coming from the lottery. So I'll walk you through that. In the original funding board, and so the funding board meets every November or so to kind of finalize what they think are the projected revenue numbers for the coming year, whether that's, tax revenues, lottery revenues, and so forth. For us, we tend to focus on, obviously, the lottery revenues. They came in with a range of $456 million to $479 million. We are through first two quarters, and we are about $40 million under that projected rate. Generally speaking, we can bank on the fact that about a quarter of the annual revenues will come each quarter. And so it's been very consistent over the 20 years of this process in funding. The Lottery Corporation is very diligent about, keeping that consistent. And so we are, again, about 40 million shy so far. If we balance out over the course of the year, we suspect that we'll come in at about 428 million, which, as you can see, is a significant drop from the original low end of that projected range. However, this year, we still enjoy a second revenue stream into the lottery fund. So the lottery revenues are coming in at 428. Our expenditures are up around 470. The sports wagering funds coming in this year will offset that shortfall. And so we project that we'll have about $30 million to move over. And I'll walk you through that a little bit in clearer fashion right here. Or actually, Pete Abernathy, who is the architect of this particular piece, will walk you through that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, committee members, this flow chart is really a very basic overview of how the funds flow through our various scholarship programs. On the left side of that chart, you'll see funding coming in from the Lottery Corporation. That comes in quarterly installments. In the current year, we're projecting about $507 million. 78 million of that, though, projected right now is from the sports wagering revenues, the privilege tax that is levied on the 80% of the privilege tax that's levied on the sports wagering revenues. All of that combined is transferred into the Lottery for Education account, which is what is used to pay for the lottery scholarship. So the Hope Scholarship and all of the others that Lou mentioned earlier are paid for out of funds in the Lottery for Education account. At the end of the year, if there are excess revenues that that exceed the cost of those lottery scholarships, that amount then, which we're projecting right now to be roughly $30 million, would be transferred by law to the Tennessee Promise Endowment. And then from the endowment, we use funds in the endowment then to pay for the Tennessee Promise Scholarship. And so that's basically the overview of what happens to those funds, where they come in, and how they're used. We also, of course, the Treasury generates a fair amount of investment earnings off of that endowment, which also remain in the endowment. Those are commingled with the unspent lottery revenues, and then they're used to pay for the Promise scholarships.
To follow up on that, so those were projections for the current fiscal year, which, as we know, is going to end shortly after session ends. And so want to provide you with a little bit of context, or at least some kind of eyes wide open perspective as you move into this session and you start considering legislation that will come before you. For 25-26, our fiscal year projections are, again, going off of those funding board recommendations. It's looking at about $460 million is the low end of that range. Again, that context that, like this year, that range at the low end was 456. Looks like we're going to come in at about 428, 430. And so we're starting off with, kind of hope for the best, prepare for the worst type of thing. 460 million, but we're estimating expenditures to remain steady at about $481 million. Again, if the 460 million is met, we're automatically going to be at a $21 million shortfall. Now, as you'll recall from discussions during the special session, in House Bill 6004, I think it was, the Freedom Scholarship legislation, there was a component of that dealt with the sports wagering funds. Those sports wagering funds are now directed not towards the lottery, but into an account managed by the treasurer, I believe, for K-12 maintenance projects and emergency needs. However, in the event that there is a year where the lottery comes in with a shortfall, it is made whole from those sports wagering dollars prior to transfer to the treasurer. So it's kind of just an emergency thing. So we don't have to dip into the reserve account. It's a catch-all. That being said, there is nothing that precludes expansion of lottery programs, either through legislation or otherwise. Just bear in mind that in a year where we have a shortfall, such expansions would exacerbate the shortfall. That would then be made whole from those sports wagering funds and not diverted into that other account. One other aspect of expansion that bears talking about is natural growth in programs. We've had two particular programs that have one that has shown radical growth over the years, and that's dual enrollment. As you can see from here, 182% growth just in 5 years. Just in the last year alone, we've seen 18, almost 19% growth. If that projection continues, that's another $10 to $12 million in expenditures just from natural take-up rate amongst high school students. Another program to bear in mind is our adult learner program, Tennessee Reconnect. During COVID, that program was really starting to take off, but we lost a lot of adult learners during the COVID years. The community college system is now starting to really pull those adults back into their enrollment numbers. And so we suspect that there'll be an uptick in the use of Reconnect dollars. Those two come directly out of lottery. I hope that's provided the committee members with some kind of context for the lottery and the revenue streams, but happy to answer any questions as best we can.
Thank you, Mr. Hanneman. I appreciate your comments and your cautionary comments. I share your concerns about the potential shortfalls. That's something that's useful for this committee to keep in mind. My experience on this committee has been that for the last several years, we've entertained a lot of bills that would be financed with lottery dollars. We've kind of tried to hold the line on spending those dollars, but that's when those dollars were actually available. And this year's going to be a little different in that those dollars really aren't available. I do have one question, though. To what extent is this shortfall in lottery dollars due to online gaming, where folks who want to gamble are moving from the lottery to online gaming?
Well, truly, I would defer that to the Lottery Corporation. I know that that has been very top of mind for them. I'm sure they've tried to address that in a number of ways. For us, our only intersection with that decision tree is in the quarterly receipts. And so I'm not sure, to what extent. I think, just as a layman, you can see kind of this and this and maybe draw some correlations, but I don't know that they would be, very scientific on my part.
Sure. And do you have any information on the amount that the state gets for every dollar spent on a lottery or the lottery versus a dollar spent on online gaming? Here's why I'm asking that question. It may be that this money is just being directed from the lottery to online gaming. I'm wondering if that has an impact on the state, and that the state gets a bigger share or cut of money spent on the lottery versus the tax it gets from online gaming.
I'll have to find out the exact figures for the online gaming. I mean, obviously, we've been drawing down 80% of the privilege tax. I believe another 15% of that goes to other parts of the state to, I guess, deal with, other issues that might arise from gambling. That 80% right now is coming in at about, $78 million. So that's pretty substantial, but I don't know what the overall revenue generation for sports wagering is. From the Lottery Corporation, from the outset, the hope was to get to the point where 35% of all revenues would be coming into the Lottery for Education account. I think the Lottery Corporation has made a pretty solid argument over the years that a lower percentage might result in a higher dollar amount due to, the more you pay out, the more you draw in game participation. And so I think that average has been somewhere around between 24 and 25% thereabouts. But again, that offset has been, pretty productive for the state. But I don't know if $470 million or $428 million this year is 25% of the overall revenue, then, I guess that would be your number.
I guess that is useful information, though, about the lottery. If $100 is spent on the lottery, then 35 goes into the Hope Scholarship, and the other 65% is either paid out in awards or administration of the lottery.
Right.
So if you're a gambler, you're losing at least 35 cents on every dollar you gamble. Representative Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Y'all should have plenty of my money because I keep losing at the lottery. So, but I just got a couple of questions real quick. You said the Tennessee Promise has quite a bit of money in it. Is that because there's not enough students qualifying, applying, or what's the reason for the large amount of money that's still sitting in the Promise?
So the Tennessee, thank you, sir, for that question. That's a good one. The Tennessee Promise is a self-funded program. And so that large amount of money, that 1.1 billion, which we hope to see grow just a little bit, is an endowment. And the earnings from that endowment are what pay for Promise. It was set up that way, with the hopes, originally with a $361 million startup money. And then it's grown over the course of the last decade to reach that 1.1 billion. The reason it's that large is that the intent was always to have it set up outside of the revenue streams and therefore not impacted by changes in the number of programs we have or things like that, but was to really set it up as this in perpetuity program. As far as take-up rates, I know that the endowment seems like a really huge amount of money. But the earnings off of that are just in the last couple of years got to the point where they're paying 1-to-1, right? Where all of the students who are participating in Tennessee Promise are actually paid for out of the earnings off of that endowment.
Representative Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the sports waging shortfall, you mentioned that whenever there is a deficit and I can't remember which one was it, in the lottery, the sports waging can cover that deficit. what happens if sports wagering cannot cover that shortfall?
I think that we would treat that, thank you again for that question. I think we would treat that much in the way that we would have treated had we not had the sports wagering revenue stream. And it comes down to this, if you'll, think back to this flow chart here, down there at the bottom, the lottery scholarship program or the Tennessee Education Lottery account has two reserve accounts. One, the $10 million is kind of an additional reserve. It can be spent one time, and once it's gone, it's kind of gone. The 100 million shortfall account is an account that we can draw on in the case of a shortfall. But in the following fiscal year, we have to put it basically on a payment plan to gradually bring it back to 100 million. Now, in a year where there's simply a funding anomaly, that's no big problem because the next year revenues come back up, we pay off the shortfall, account, and then everything's fine. If we enter into a second year with a shortfall, then we have to look at prorating programs. We have some programs where we can kind of shrink the award and other programs where we simply tighten up eligibility. Again, we've never had to do that. We've had 1 year, I believe, in the 20 years where we had a shortfall. We dipped into that shortfall account to make the account whole. And the next year, the funding came back just fine. And, so we don't have any experience with having to prorate the award amounts and don't suspect really that we would. I think every indication is that the sports wagering money is on an incline for the indefinite future.
Yes, Representative Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't want to relitigate the Education Freedom Fund or anything like that. But the ideal of that fund, some of the money would be used to cover school maintenance, the maintenance of schools. But it has to be used to replenish the scholarship funds before it's used for any of the maintenance piece. Will that create any issues with you all in the long run by having to do that?
That's a pretty thoughtful question. I think it only becomes an issue if, again, and this would be out of character for this General Assembly and those in recent years, if we simply expanded the lottery beyond all reason. And again, I think we've been pretty measured in our approach to expanding programs, but we would have to expand, by several tens of millions, I think, to jeopardize the mission or the new intent of those sports wagering dollars and its ability to cover shortfalls in the lottery. Again, we're not clear whether or not this year is simply a dip in lottery funding for whatever reason. I think, I've heard from the Lottery Corporation year after year, years where we have huge Powerballs and Mega Millions, the money is big. And years where we don't, the money's not so big. We've been kind of fortunate in the last several years to have, pretty high revenues. This may simply be an anomaly. But in the long run, I think our shortfalls have never pushed into those tens and tens of millions. And so hopefully this is just, we're going to ride that margin and we'll just be made whole. We wouldn't have to significantly dip into those funds.
Chairman Raper.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have a general question that I've been wondering a while, but what would be your reason, or possibly what are your reasons for projected shortfalls in revenues from the lottery? What's going on that's causing this?
I'll probably, thank you for that question, sir. I would probably have to claim that's, above my pay grade, or at least in a different category of pay grade. These discussions took place before the State Funding Board back in November. And to be honest, I'm not sure they had a lot of answers for why this may be, related to the sports wagering, but, you're talking about a significant amount of data and really not a lot of time to make those kinds of analyses, if you will. I know they're working on it. We've had similar questions from members and others, and we certainly put that to the Lottery Corporation. So as soon as we hear something, be happy to get that information to you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? If not, then I'd like to thank you, Mr. Hanneman and Mr. Abernathy, for coming and sharing this information with us. It's valuable, particularly as we look at a lot of bills that would be financed with lottery proceeds. We're back in session, and I think I probably should make one more announcement, and that is that at the end of our last meeting, we will have a lottery calendar, or a calendar of bills that would dip into the lottery. The two bills you heard today would not expend any lottery proceeds. They were out of the general fund, and so that's why we heard them today. But moving forward, bills that are financed by the lottery will go to our last calendar. Is there any other business to come before the committee? If not, then we're adjourned.